It was at Zoom. I was looking for my next corporate gig because this was during the time when, you could hear the writing on the wall of layoffs coming and that kind of stuff. And so I want to make sure I had like a good professional resume. And I'm like, I'm going to start creating content. Well, what do I enjoy? What kind of tools do I enjoy using? Airtable was one of those. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to put out some video on this kind of content and just see what happens because I thought it would be a demo reel for my next sales or professional services engagement. That's what I was going for. And it was within about a month, I think, of creating that first video without intending to. I had no call to action. It wasn't like, come visit my website and learn more or whatever. Within a month, I had someone reach out and say, hey, can you help me with my own Airtable setup? And then I was like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. I didn't even really think about that. So I started creating some more content. And it was about 2 months after that. So now we're talking about 3 months from the first video that I made that I had so many clients that I was like, I either need to quit my job or I need to like shut down what I'm doing because there are so many people who are in need of automation, business process, workflow type service offerings. And that's when I took the leap of faith and I said, you know what, we're going to make this happen. I'm going to leave my 300K salary at a big tech company to go off into the unknown world of what this could be. And so that is how we started this.
Hey everyone, welcome to Flow State. This is a brand new show brought to you by Pipe Dream, where we will be showcasing the best of the best in the world of automation and RevOps agencies to hear how they've been able to turn their client automation dreams into business realities. Now, let's face it, busy business owners and company leaders want to streamline their internal operations through automation. Although no-code tools are accessible, would you rather spend hundreds of hours watching tutorials, or do you want to work with somebody who could actually implement a solution in a fraction of the time so you could focus on running your business? Now, this week's guest built Automation Helpers, which is a company full of implementers and integrators who help get the most value out of your software and connect to the applications that are already central to your business. Now, some of these popular business apps that they're using automation for, but are not limited to, include Calendly, G Suite, Microsoft, DocuSign, QuickBooks, Airtable, SmartSuite, and really, truly many more. Now, in the last quarter alone, they've helped a range of companies such as financial services, legal, accounting, installation services, political consulting, event management, engineering, healthcare, retail. I probably missed some other ones as well. But without further ado, please join me in welcoming the co-founder of Automation Helpers, Mr. Dan Leeman. Dan, welcome to Not Just a Pipe Dream.
Hey, thanks. Really appreciate it, Tyler. Great to be here.
Yes, such a great, thank you for all of the fine content that I just shared from your LinkedIn profile. It really gives us a good understanding of really what are some of these tools that you can automate, as well as what are all of the different industries, and really people are really interested in trying to make their companies more efficient. As we'll get into a little bit later, probably shouldn't be automating every single thing, which I know you have a hot take on as well. But Dan, before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit more, I think, just about your story alone, right? You went from the sales side, from account management to sales manager, and then you started moving into this like pre-sales architect before managing pro services at Zoom, and then starting Automation Helpers. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that journey looked like, and how all those experiences came together to really come to starting Automation Helpers?
Yeah, you got it. It actually started earlier than that. I was a teacher. I was a public school teacher before all my sales background. So throughout my career, I've always found I'm the kind of person that likes to string together multiple skill sets and kind of take a combination of them to really enhance what it is that I'm doing. So started off in teaching, but that moved me into ed tech. From ed tech, I was like, hey, we don't have a sales team. I'm going to get on the sales side of stuff and sell kind of this publishing platform we were doing for education. And then my first foray into the technical side was as I was selling, then I realized we've got all these different disparate systems and it's a pain for me to sell on this kind of stuff. So I think we were using HubSpot, or we might have been on Zoho at the time and then switched to HubSpot. And then we were using a different help desk software. And I was like, I need to be able to see my opportunities when I'm in the help desk software. And I want to be able to automate my invoicing because that's just a pain in the butt when I'm trying to do this at the end of the month and invoice customers. And so that was my first technical foray of like, cool, I've got all these really pressing needs in the business. This automation exercise isn't just a pipe dream, I guess you'd say, as I'm trying to set this up, but it's got real meaning to what I'm doing. So I invested some time there, and I started to really enjoy that. And so I found myself getting into these two parts of my brain and my personality. I had the technical side of me, and then I had the sales and training and educating side of me. And that kind of led to entering into more technical pre-sales, worked with a Microsoft partner in that area for a while, got into the CRM space, worked at Sugar CRM and was working on some really large CRM implementations. Ended up at a chatbot company. And I say it was kind of the hipster phase of chatbots because this was actually before ChatGPT came out. So this is before there were, 10,000 different chat companies that were out there. And from there, we got acquired by Zoom. And so through this process, kind of moved up market in the enterprise side of things, doing a lot of enterprise implementations. But when I was at Zoom, I really found kind of a deep desire to get back. Here I was like director level at Zoom, and I wanted to get back into really making like a big impact for small and medium-sized businesses as well. So I kind of looked to how can we take a lot of what's going on in digital transformation projects for enterprise. How can we package this up and really deliver a lot of that value for customers that don't have the same budget? It might be a mom and pop shop. It might be a small business with 20 to 50 employees that still could benefit from a lot of the automation. And so that's kind of, it's a bit of a whirlwind tour through my career, but that's kind of where I got to where I am today.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I think it's fantastic. And I didn't know about the school teacher thing, which I think is really cool too, because I would argue that that's probably one of the hardest selling jobs that you could have, of like keeping people's attention and focus and all of those things, which are probably enough for another podcast.
Well,
But
Tyler, if I can jump in on that one, I echo that 100%. When people ask about sales, the hardest sales job I have is convincing a sixth grade parent that their kid should play oboe. Because if you've heard a sixth grade oboe is starting out for the first time, it's the squawkiest instrument you could hear. So trying to convince someone that that's like the right decision for their family, I think is more challenging than selling any kind of SaaS.
yeah, and one more question on this, because I did see that when you were a band director on the oboe side, you helped scale the band from 100 to 250 students. Is there any parallels between scaling a big organization like that in any type of business that you've been in as well, or is that just a complete reach?
No, I mean, honestly, I think there's certain personalities when it comes to building a company. And this is why I've been really fortunate to have great co-founders that I work along with. My focus is on growth. I want to tell stories. I want to help people. I want to grow the business. And that's what I did. Like when I was teaching, I grew a program. When I was at that company and I started sales, I grew their sales team and the revenue for that company. Now, as I'm in my own company, I'm just focused on, how can we scale this over time? And that's how my mind's geared. That's what helps our clients too, to help them as they scale their own operations.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I thank you so much for taking us. Hopefully that was a nice little walk down memory lane. But in every, all the podcast conversations or just interviews I have with really smart people, all of the experiences that they have really pile up leading up to what they have today, whether it's they're actually using that or it's some type of acumen or something like that. I mean, I'm sure that even some of your previous experience helped with some of the groups, as I mentioned, that you're working with today, of the list of, financial services, installation groups, all of those as well. Tell me a little bit more. Let's start talking more about automation helpers, and like, are there any big trends? I know we talked about all those different types of companies and the different tech that they're leveraging today, but are there any like specialties or focus areas that you see, or are people just of all different areas need some type of automation help?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the questions we had early on was if we wanted to niche down, because I'd say most business advice tells you to like go after one vertical and really specialize in that. We've kind of gone the other approach, which is to say, we've focused on a number of key platforms that we want to partner with. And so you mentioned some of them like Airtable and SmartSuite and whatnot. And we found that by creating content around each of those areas, we actually find people from a huge variety of verticals. Now, what ends up happening, I think, in the types of clients that we work with is it's not actually mostly tech companies and things. It's honestly more blue collar and service-based companies, any kind of company that really involves people. And the reason I think that is huge and prevalent in terms of the makeup of the kinds of companies that we serve is because there's the most opportunity for automation when you have tons of people processes in your organization. And so if you've got, a number of, let's talk financial services, right? And so you've got different people who are providing different financial instruments and packages to people, and they have interpersonal relationships with their clients. Then they have all these processes that might or might not be documented and that kind of stuff. But there's always opportunity for things to go wrong. If it's all clicking, it goes really well. And if it's not, if we don't have processes, if we don't have automation, if we can't see the holistic picture of our clients, that's where things can go really wrong. And so I think we found the most opportunity for any kind of service-based business, especially. Whereas when you're working with like tech companies, typically a lot of things are automated just because you've got developers and there's analytics for this and everything else that's baked into it. So while we don't necessarily niche down on a certain industry or vertical, I think that's the trend of what we've seen is largely companies that are very people focused in nature.
That's really interesting. And I come from like, I come from a really small town, really blue collar background. So I completely understand where, whether it's like construction or like any of these other groups, it's really important to still you don't think of those types of companies of like, we need to automate this. But at the end of the day, companies still need to achieve the goals that they're looking to accomplish, right? Is it more like these companies are coming to you? Like, is there a big appetite for these blue collar kind of groups to use technology? Or is there some kind of like more selling that you need to do in order to see that? Because they may not necessarily see the like, I didn't even know I could potentially automate this. What does that look like?
Yeah. So in reality, we don't really do a whole lot of selling. People see the content that we do and it resonates with them and they come to us and they're already like, boom, how can we make this happen? I've got this huge idea. So rarely am I acting as an evangelist at the point at which we're trying to make a sale for our services. I think what we do is we try to position, just like you're talking about, different use cases to kind of show the art of the possible of like, here's a business with automation versus what it looks like without automation. Here's what your invoicing looks like without automation. Here's what it could look like if it's automated. So I think we help tell some of those stories earlier in the process. But honestly, I think a couple of the things at play here are that you've got a lot of businesses who there's now kind of turning over to the next generation as some of the companies are being sold. And then you've seen just like this huge evolution of technology where honestly, we probably have more clients that are not coming from, oh, I'm using Salesforce or I'm using, some like industry standard SaaS platform. It's a lot of people who we're using spreadsheets today. I think people totally underestimate the number of businesses in the US that are still on Post-it notes and spreadsheets. And they've got their assistants who have a great organizational system, but it's really not available to everybody else. And so I think those are the kinds of conversations of people realizing like as technology is becoming more accessible and by accessible, I mean, the prices drop a lot too, right? Like you don't have to invest. I remember when I was working at one of the CRM companies I was at, we'd be quoting a custom integration for like $50,000 to build one integration in virtually exactly the same way that we're building it now with tools like Pipedream. And so, I think people are realizing like I can actually get ROI from what I'm doing. And so because of that, that's driving a lot of the conversation. So both with like the generational shift, but then also with some of the economic conditions, it's like, well, hey, why wouldn't I be automating this at this point?
Yeah, and a huge, huge, huge plus one as well to that. The younger generations really starting to take the keys to some of these businesses, right? We hear the average B2B buyers in like their mid 30s or like, I don't know where exactly. I've heard that quote somewhere. I don't know exactly where it was from, but it makes sense, right? People are starting to adopt these newer forms of technologies. And honestly, like, working at different roles that I've had, it's really shocking to see even the biggest businesses, like some of the like top ones that you see probably on your LinkedIn feed and others that are still using spreadsheets or really don't have their stuff together. So, I mean, it just really goes to show that whether you're that like mom and pop, small blue collar business, or you're one of these larger organizations, there's still different ways to use automation and things like that as well. Now,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say in the large companies, you've got these huge data silos, right? You'd think, oh, all these big tech brands have, really good data architecture and they know, what's happening between departments. No way. They have different leaders, they choose different software. No one takes the time or the budget to actually integrate the software together. And so you've got this entirely different set of needs at the enterprise level, which are just as prevalent and as big of an issue, but different than you see from small businesses.
That's right. Every company has problems, big or small. Now that's probably an issue, or I've noticed this in the past as well, having to pull different groups together so that they could show like, hey, this is what's actually going on. There's three sides to every story, right? But I'd be curious. That's obviously one of the tough parts, I believe, in running an agency. What are some of the things that you see, or what are some of those tough parts of owning an agency yourself?
Owning an agency, yeah. I mean, I think for us, as we go after different verticals, that means that there's different needs for each of those industries. And so, us being able to have kind of the internal knowledge of all the inner workings of different verticals and be able to say, here's best practices, even if you're the first pastry shop retail client that we've ever had before, and being able to dig into that. And so I think that really comes down to us on the hiring side of trying to find we've actually like shifted the kind of the hiring profile for people. We found that hiring people for the client facing soft skills are way more important than the technology skills. Technology skills we can actually teach much easier. So we're trying to find the person who can really dig into business, understand business process, understand project management and client deliverables and all that kind of stuff, and then be able to teach database architecture and integration logic and everything else. And that's why I find it really interesting. You've got so many, I'd say, other agencies that are like, we're going to do everything through AI. It's going to be me and we're just going to have systems, whatever. People don't know how to communicate with technology. When you're talking to the average business owner, the reason they reach out to an agency is because they can't just do it themselves, or that the amount of time that it takes isn't worthwhile because they're a CEO or a business owner of their company. And so for us, I think we really depend on the personal connections as a huge piece of that, to actually work with a person who can say, hey, I understand what you're going through. Here's how I think we can optimize that process. And then just making sure that you offer that like consistent level of service as you scale, as you grow.
Yeah, 1,000%. And it's so interesting. Like even some of the top clients that we have, to your point of like, they just want to run their business. We've had like I said, some of our top clients are just like, I don't care about how to build this. I don't care how the sausage is made. We just want to know that this is going to do this and I could focus on running my business. And I think really to your point, I know you alluded to it briefly, but like really selling now seems like it's really just truly showing more of like, what is the art of the possible and what can you do, and providing an awareness to what different automation, and I hate to even keep saying automation. It's just more about business process. What could we try to streamline that as well? Automation is just one tool in the toolbox of making sure that your business is more efficient. I know that, before we hit record, you mentioned something really interesting about a lot of the demand is coming from the content that you guys are creating. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you see content playing into helping agencies grow their client list?
Yeah, for sure. So, as of today, in terms of our influx of leads and everything else, we do almost everything entirely through inbound. We probably have about 10% of our leads that come from partnerships. But again, those partnerships were kind of forged off of doing content. So, when we talked about how we started Automation Helpers, uh, part of it was a little bit of serendipity. When I was at Zoom, I was looking for my next corporate gig, because this was during the time when, you could hear the writing on the wall of layoffs coming and that kind of stuff. And so I want to make sure I had like a good professional resume. And I'm like, I'm going to start creating content. Well, what do I enjoy? What kind of tools do I enjoy using? Airtable was one of those. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to put out some video on this kind of content and just see what happens, because I thought it would be a demo reel for my next sales or professional services engagement. That's what I was going for. And it was within about a month, I think, of creating that first video without intending to. I had no call to action. It wasn't like, come visit my website and learn more or whatever. Within a month, I had someone reach out and say, hey, can you help me with my own Airtable setup? And then I was like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. I didn't even really think about that. So I started creating some more content. And it was about 2 months after that. So now we're talking about 3 months from the first video that I made, that I had so many clients that I was like, I either need to quit my job or I need to like shut down what I'm doing because there are so many people who are in need of automation, business process, workflow type service offerings. And that's when I took the leap of faith and I said, you know what, we're going to make this happen. I'm going to leave my 300K salary at a big tech company to go off into the unknown world of what this could be. And so that is how we started this, and we keep doubling down on content. Everything we do is, if we have a client problem we're working on, it turns into a video later on. We just hired 2 additional content creators for the next year because we know how powerful this content can be. And so I think it's crazy because you've got all these influencers and creators on the more consumer driven side of things, who have millions of subscribers. We have like 16,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, but that's enough to do millions of dollars in business in automation services. And so I really think that for agencies, there's this huge opportunity of, if you really know your stuff and you can teach it and you can educate people through that process, then long form video is going to be amazing at being able to demonstrate that to people, help them think through their own problems, and then you already have that trust built. I'll have someone who comes into our website who says, Dan, I've watched 25 of your videos last night and I have all these ideas and I want to talk through them. And we're not spending time then credentializing and saying, well, here's automation helpers and what we do, and here's our clients and whatever else. We're spending that time talking about the problems that they're facing in their business, and they already trust us because of the content that they've been seeing. So I'm hugely passionate about content and inbound, especially in this time of AI's providing more automated outbound outreach opportunities. Sure, you can send millions of emails at scale. And I'm like, I would rather just be doing inbound all day long and building our brand reputation than needing to worry about that side of it, to be honest.
100%. And I think it's so interesting. Like, that's why I love this whole premise of like this partner-led content is like what I love about what we're building with our partnership program, because
Yeah.
that's exactly to your point. I mean, right, we both have mutual, you guys are a Pipe Dream customer and partner. However, we have a mutual shared interest in driving our own business, but the way we do it is we're talking about agencies and what they could do and how we could help them. And I think that when you're starting to find that like mutual point of where do all of these intersection and what's that value that we could provide to our partners or to our clients, then that's going to help the partners and that's going to help us. We're not focused on just driving our revenue. We're focused on how could we create something that's going to be impactful for our clients, which then is more impactful for partners and helps us as a big downstream effect as well. But
Exactly.
you really have no idea though. Like, I love your story because you really have no idea what could happen when you just start creating content, right? Like for me, like, when I look back, because I started at Pipe Dream 2 months ago, and I look back initially, like, because there was a reduction in force in my previous role. And as soon as I saw that happen, this is a little bit more about how I even got to Pipe Dream. It's because of content. My boss, Danny Archer, who's our head of revenue here, I connected with him in April of last year because he liked some piece of content that I had on account management, my process, right? Sure. And I have I have my own process of, if somebody is liking a post that I have, I will write, hey, thank you for liking X, so that I have this memory down the road of how did we actually connect in the first place. A year and a half later, when I was looking for work, Danny liked my open for work post. I sent him a message, and then he said, hey, have you ever done partnerships before? I was on a call with him the next day. I was on with Todd, our CEO, the next following Wednesday, and then with our head of product and our other co-founders the following week to ultimately land here. And it all started with creating that content. I never would have known that this would have landed me here. And I think it's just I think from your story and my story, I think it really shows the true testament of starting creating content, whether you're an agency or you're just an individual, listening to this show right now. I think it's really important to just start creating content because you never really know what's going to happen. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, exactly to what you're saying, it opens doors. That's, I think, the biggest part. Like, I didn't realize that we're going to be doing all this lead gen, demand gen through content. And that's where we ended up. And it worked great for us. And then I see people like you, and it's like, you have no idea where your next employment opportunity comes from. But there's like a high degree chance that if you're branding yourself through your content, like, that's going to be 10 times easier than if you're trying to go through an applicant tracking system and you're applying for thousands of jobs, as opposed to this personal connection built off of the content. One more example I'd say for us is on the partnership side, because as we build a B2B audience, even though it's not huge, right? We're not doing like random Notion templates and getting millions of subscribers that way. There's only so many people out there that are really good at talking about B2B use cases and how it helps customers and how these new features tie into these things. And so because of that, we probably get, I don't know, 3 to 5 sponsorship requests a day. And we just don't have time for most of them, or they're maybe not aligned with our fit. But that's opened the door for almost all the partnerships that we have were because of the content that we initially created. And then there's usually some part of our relationship that's content driven because of it. So that right there is 3 different use cases of finding your next employment, being able to use it for demand and lead gen, being able to create partnerships from it, that I think it's a really successful model.
And I think that one of the other biggest things as well, before we start jumping into more of the business impact of automation, like I think cutting through the noise, especially in this world of AI, right? We see, like your inbox is probably more full than ever as we're hearing from everybody. You could see posts on LinkedIn that are AI, but we're also starting to see some of these videos of like the AI where somebody's sitting here like this, just talking, and you could tell that it's not authentic.
Yeah.
That's what I think developing, from the content creation standpoint, I think it's important from the creator. This is an important skill to be able to talk to people, and it's going to help you cut through the noise, especially in this big world of AI as well.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk a little bit more into the talking about automation for customers and some common use cases. But when you look at like the whole spectrum of different tools that people could use for automation, there's the no code tools, and then there's the I'm going to go build a custom integration in AWS or some other hosted solution.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit more about what some of your best practices are when you're deciding, am I gonna go with this no code tool? Do I need to go with this custom code solution? Tell us a little bit more about what that decision making process looks like from the agency perspective.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting conversation because I feel like it's one of those windows that keeps shifting a little bit as there's new development. So one of the things that, is pretty hot right now is you've got Replit and Cursor and tools like that, where it's not just the code, but now we're doing more AI based writing of code, which really, improves that process. In fact, one of the things that you guys are doing at Pipedream, being able to have an AI code editor as I'm writing integrations directly there, hugely helpful as we're doing it. So I kind of look at it from a couple different perspectives. There's like the UI application development for internal applications that usually we're still using a no code platform for it. So whether you're talking the Airtables or Smart Suites, or maybe you're building a front end, you've got like a softer, no loco or glide or whatever. There's so much value that those platforms provide, but not just the value, it's also the guardrails that get put on so that a user can't click on something and then suddenly it throws a million errors, right? Because they've baked permissions in there. They've baked a user management structure in there. And because of all those different pieces, that's where when we're building an internal tool, typically we're going to use a no-code platform to be able to support the UI side of it and some of the light business logic through some of their automations and things like that. If we're doing an external application, then typically those platforms are a little bit more limiting. Plus, you have more the desire for kind of the pixel perfect design kind of stuff, whatever. Then I'm a little bit less likely to go towards no code. And that's typically where we're looking at a custom coded solution as part of that, if we're talking about kind of the UI layer to it. In between that is what I'd consider low code, which is we need more of the advanced capabilities of some SQL querying. Typically you can't directly query the database if you're doing it in one of the no-code platforms. So that provides some of that functionality. Maybe you have some custom data visualization components you want to be able to use for it. It takes off some of the guardrails, but still is overall a platform that still provides some additional time to value if you're using something like a retool or a buddy base for that. On the integration side, we're finding ourselves gravitating a lot more towards code. And that's where I think Pipedream has been a great partner for us. So in the past, there's lots of consultants, I would say, that are saying like, hey, use make.com, right? Like if we're going to get in the weeds here of talking about integration stuff, you've got your Zapiers, and the advantage of Zapier is going to be that for a business owner, it's like the most guardrails. It's really easy for simplistic use cases. Then you had kind of Make emerge and say like, well, yeah, except that you've got these more complicated use cases, but they're still, everything is kind of module based for it, and you want to iterate on something. Well, now you have to iterate, now you have to aggregate, and you have to use our aggregate module in order to be able to do that. And so you get stuck in this over engineering, I would say, that a lot of consultants actually aren't very technical, and they will over engineer what needs to be done at the expense of the performance for the client. And so what I found is being able to write code with, say, Pipedream makes it so that you don't have to create all these layers of abstraction. If you want to interact with the JSON, you just interact with the JSON. If you need to be able to make an API call to one platform, and you need to transform it, and then you need to make an API call to a different platform, and then you need to make changes to that data, it makes so much more sense to do through code. And so one of the things I find is, and we do a lot of work with Make and Zapier too, for client environments who feel like, hey, we want to have some control over this. But what gets me every time is there's always consultants on LinkedIn who post a picture of an automation that they built on make.com. And you've seen these pictures, right? It's all these like, it looks like a flower. It's like this, ooh, look at this super complicated thing I built. And there's like 70 bubbles or modules on the page of all the stuff they've done. And what they don't realize is that they're replicating their business logic. So if you want to make a change to something, now you have to change it 50 different places all over the place. And so what I think is that oftentimes there's not enough knowledge to understand that it would be better not to replicate your business logic. You want to keep it simple. You want to create a function that can be reused, that you can pass data into and get data out of. And that's where I think the advantage of writing code lives, especially for integration and automation work, is that we can build things that are essentially, functions or containers, wrappers around our business logic that we can deploy again very easily. And that, I think, is a true savings for the client. It's just hard to communicate it with the client because, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, the client cares that the thing works. And so for them, they're not thinking, oh, which platform do I use? Whatever. Like if they're going to maintain it themselves, they're looking for kind of the easier thing to use. But if they're looking for like true operational efficiency, that's where I think, writing code can really be helpful there.
Yeah, 1,000%. And I think one of the biggest things that we hear on that front as well from both clients and partners is really not being able to have that visibility into what that JSON payload is, or being able to, like you said, to be able to, translate it in a step where it's kind of like, if it's not exactly the pre-built way that one of the other no-code solutions may have already built it, then you don't have that flexibility or changing into making some of those changes. So I think keeping it simple is a really huge piece of advice there. Now, we hear all the time that like, hey, sometimes from the agency perspective, right? Hey, our client, the agency may know that Pipedream is the best solution to solve the problem based upon their experience or just being able to see what this entails. But the client already has an account with one of the other tools like Zapier, Make, or maybe even AWS, where they're just going to push that way. What type of advice do you have for clients or other agency owners who are trying to convince their clients that, hey, that to use a different tool than what they're used to because it could be the best solution for that problem?
So in all honesty, it's not too often where I'm trying to convince someone to use a different platform unless there's a legitimate thing that we can do that we're solving. So an example would be of one of the pieces of functionality you guys have come up with lately is Pipedream Connect, which essentially gives the ability to have like a dashboard or a UI where someone could just toggle on an integration, maybe plug in some config settings, but that can just be enabled. So imagine, it's kind of akin to a platform like ActiveCampaign or HubSpot or whatever, where you log in and there's like a gazillion integrations that we can enable and make that possible on our platform. And that's one of those innovations where I'm like, cool, for an agency who's looking to do more templatized, productized kind of integrations, that would make a really good natural fit. Rarely do I find for a client it's saying like, hey, you really should be using these guys for this. What I find is more when they realize that there's a limitation. So for example, Make plays really heavily into, oh, our operations are so much cheaper than what Zapier is doing for their tasks. But you don't realize until you get into it that every single time you iterate over a line item and you do a couple of functions for those line items, that now costs you multiple operations. So we had a client that we were migrating from HubSpot into SmartSuite, and we wanted to take their thousands and thousands of activity records, right? So all their emails and their notes and all that kind of stuff, we wanted to migrate into a different platform. And so, one of the thoughts was, okay, could we use make.com to be able to do that? Well, we started just like a little POC. We're like, we're going to take an hour time box, see what that would look like. And the operational cost to migrate it was going to be like several $1,000s because of the amount of iteration that had to happen because of these. I mean, we were talking hundreds of thousands of records that we had to deal with. And so that was obviously not the right solution. So anytime people are trying to do like reporting with different tools, I'm like, you got to be thinking about if this is the right tool for the job. And unfortunately, a lot of agencies are really tied to, they feel comfortable using a tool. And so they're like, well, that's what it costs. But at that point, that's when we're like, oh no, we're not, that's not going to be the approach that we're going to take. We're going to write some code to do it. Now, at the time, this was actually before I had heard of Pipedream. And so I went back into my IDE and I wrote a Python script that did all of this. But it was tricky, right? Because I had to run it locally. I wasn't going to spin up a server for it. I had to manage the authentication pieces. That took a while to do, et cetera. And I know I would have shaved off even more time had I used Pipedream to be able to pull that data. Now, going to that custom coded solution still costs just a tiny fraction of what it would be to use one of these other platforms. This is a long-winded answer to your question, but the client cared about their data going from one system to another system. Most clients don't actually care about which platform it is that I'm using for integration. The things they do care about are, hey, if I have to kick you out later as an agency, can someone else support this? And that's why custom code is sometimes difficult because they're like, well, great, now I have to find another developer to be able to maintain this and do that and whatnot. But when it comes to actually choosing the solution, I think the conversation really is about how does this support what you're looking to do? In their case, it was activity management and migration of that data. And so, like I said before, rarely is it I'm the evangelist trying to say, this is the platform to standardize on, because you're right. You've got some companies who are like, sure, we'll have Zapier and Make and Pipedream and N8N and everything. And you're like, well, that's going to get a little bit messy. And you've got other people who are like, well, I want to standardize on one. And if that's not doing it, we need to support this. So the conversations are multidimensional, but I think it definitely comes down to, does the technology support that use case and the cost associated with it?
That's exactly right. And I think that even Todd, our founder and CEO, will say, like, find the best tool for the problem, right? It may be another no-code solution. However, there also are a lot of limitations that may come from that. Or, hey, from that AWS solution, it can be, a lot of things could be done there, but is it the right tool for all of those other factors that you mentioned of, hey, you have to manage your authentication, which I know is a big pain point that people say in going with an AWS, or the limits of flexibility in some of the other tools. That's why it's really important to, understand what are the variables that we're looking to achieve. And if from a business perspective, you don't know how to do that, then reach out to somebody like Dan, who could help with really deciding what type of tool could be the right solution. Now, Dan, I'm curious as well. I know you mentioned, hey, we use some of the no-code tools for some of our internal process, but are there any ways that Pipedream's really streamlined some of your own agency operations, or really trying to make value to your clients easier as well?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been digging into is, over the past year and a half we've been in business, we've started off doing mostly, time and material, hourly kinds of building. People come to us with a problem. We give an estimate on how long we think that'll take. We build solutions for them. Where we're starting to kind of evolve to and see is that there's certain automations and integrations that don't need to be custom every single time that you do that. So I'll give you a couple examples. One is around contracting, and others around invoicing. Some of these core business processes where there's a number of different ways that you can handle it, but it's still, n number of variations, not thousands and thousands that you'd be looking at. And so what we've started to do is be able to kind of productize or templatize some of these common integrations so that when we spin up a project management system on one of these no-code platforms, it's already integrated and working from day one, that it's going to be able to do their invoicing. That you can say, like, here's my project with all my tasks, and it aggregates all my tasks, and it knows the billing information. We've got the customer master data, and it pushes that into QuickBooks. And there's only so many ways to do that. And we were really looking for a technology partner that would support the level of customization needed, which need to be done via code, but also be able to have some of the other working pieces that we could provide, like different versions, different variations of this to be able to launch out to our clients. So for us, it's been great. Yes, we can use Pipedream both for individual clients and say, cool, you guys set up your workspace and we're going to build some custom stuff for you and push it into your workspace. But it's also kind of that next level, which is going to unlock new revenue opportunities for us of being able to say, hey, we can provide even more, faster time to value by having some of these integrations that are pre-baked on day one that, yeah, maybe we have to do like a couple hours of work of additional customization, but we're not having to start from scratch to be able to deploy that. And that, I think, is one of the most exciting pieces that Pipedream has helped enable us to be able to do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. In the middle of that, you mentioned invoicing, project management, and really a couple other different business critical use cases for companies. Are you able to share any other like complex workflows that you've automated, even if it's not specifics for a customer, even at like these disparate data sources? Tell me a little bit more about how Pipedream have solved some of those problems as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think for us, being able to have like communication management is like a huge piece of this too. You'd be surprised the number of businesses that are like, we operate over text and email and like all these like person-to-person communication interfaces, but all of that data lives separately aside from where the work is being done. So sure, we do Slack messages to talk to our clients about the issues they're going through, but we have no way of actually showing this against the actual work being done. And so one of the requests that comes up a ton, I'd say our financial services clients especially, is like, we have really valuable information, but it takes place over email. And so how do we sync all of that data to be able to have kind of one source of, if I want to see every single touch point from a customer to know what conversations are being held. And that is something that we do definitely through the integration layer using tools like Pipedream to be able to say, we're going to pull from all these different communication sources. We're on a Zoom call right now to record this podcast. Tools like Fireflies, which automatically transcribe conversations that took place. So one of the things that we do is on our sales calls, on our consultation calls, we obviously don't have time for all of our consultants to listen to every single sales call that took place. They're going to dig into certain details, but they need to know that information ahead of time. Well, if we can take Pipedream and say, we're going to sync all of these calls and we're going to summarize some of the data and we're going to take that, we're even going to take some of the action items and we're going to determine who needs to see this. Because obviously if I have calls as the CEO role, I don't want everybody to have access to that. I want them to see our certain client consultation calls. So being able to create that level of business logic, which then enables our team to be able to operate more efficiently. So they have access to all these customer touch points when we want them to have access to, has been huge for both our business and then enabling that kind of client communication infrastructure for our clients as well.
I love that. And I think that's a perfect example of how a tool like Pipedream could really help with that cross-functional collaboration, right? I mean, like, obviously I'm a second go-to-market hire here. So we're doing partnerships, but also really closely interface with product and really interface with marketing and like being able to, there's even clips from this call that I'm going to share with the product team or other feature requests or any and all of these above. If we're able to route this, now I feel like I'm gonna have to sit down and think about how we could, I'm doing this manually now, Dan. So thank you so much for really just spinning my brain into a spiral of how I could just start trying to leverage Pipedream for even some more of our own
It's a
internal.
black hole, man. You're going to spend a lot of time there, just so you know, but it's cool
You know
stuff.
what? It's so funny. I don't know if you know Paul over at Connex Digital, but he said that he started doing more. He's automating his house now too with different
Oh,
websites and
sure.
stuff like that. He's like, don't go down that path. But we could say, but that really,
I've heard that's an expensive one to go down too.
yeah,
If you're gonna,
anyway. But I think that's really interesting because it kind of really makes it feel like the future is here, right? So I'm curious from your perspective, as we're just wrapping up here. What advice do you have for other agencies who are looking to deliver some of these advanced automation solutions for their clients?
yeah, I really think it comes down to understand the business and the business problem first, because I think there's so much hype out there in terms of AI and everything AI can do. And one of the things that I always try to share with people is like AI probably makes up about 15% of the kinds of automation type projects that we do for our clients. There's certainly amazing value that can be unlocked there. But we were kind of joking around before the call, the whole like everything's an agent, and suddenly you're going to be a business owner with 20 agents and no employees making $1 billion a year. I'm like, if we're talking about pipe dreams, that's a bit of a pipe dream from my perspective.
Right.
So I think for agencies who are really looking to get into this, don't buy into the hype of all the AI automation agency stuff as a branding term behind it. I would say the more deeply you understand business problems and the people who have those problems, and you can walk into a conversation saying, "Hey, I think based off of, real estate investor client, here's what I think is the kinds of problems that you're facing," and they validate that and they add on, and you understand that, that's going to be the source for how you develop amazing relationships with clients and being able to automate processes, not coming to people and saying, yeah, we're selling chatbots and chatbots are going to make sure that you have all this additional revenue coming to your website. Like there's just so much fluff. So get away from the fluff and focus on truthfully the core processes that are going to help really streamline those internal operations.
Dan, that is so fantastic. And right, like automating everything is not the solution. Even working for somebody who works at a company that does automations like yourself, or somebody who makes a living on trying to help more people do automation, it's really important to emphasize, if I haven't enough, don't automate everything. I think it's really important to understand which items we should automate, which ones we shouldn't automate. Now, do you have any input on and feedback just from like a process perspective, Dan, on like when companies should automate something, or when they or more importantly, when they absolutely shouldn't automate something?
Yeah, well, and to even kind of dig into what you were saying there, I mean, like I'd say the last, I don't know, 6 to 9 months has been this huge boon of technology for SDR teams. It's been like, okay, how do we automatically spin up and provision and warm up email domains so we can do more cold emails that we're sending? And then we want to send emails not just in bulk, but we want to understand the sales triggers behind it. So we're using trigger-based data and intent-based data to understand, okay, all of that is great and works really well for some businesses. And by no means am I saying there's no value to be had there, because I know it's been successful for a lot of businesses. However, if you think about it, I'm a business owner, and now that means I've gotten inundated by more and more spam of everyone who has access to this automation technology. So instead of some people being able to cut through the noise with great subject lines and everything else, in reality, so much of that is now getting filtered off to spam. It's getting harder for people to get a hold of me on my phone or via email. And so sometimes I think in this great desire for automate everything, we lack a lot of the real human touch behind things. I think there's two pieces. There's the human touch, and then there's also having the guardrails of like, this is a valuable interaction, and you wouldn't want something that AI is right 80% of the time. Yeah, but if they screw it up that 20% of the time, that like is a messes up the brand of your business. So I think there's kind of two main fronts there. And so for example, when we're talking about the value of automation, we try to really automate a lot of the boring, tedious processes for businesses with the intended goal of freeing up founders and business owners to focus on the revenue generating actual activities that matter. So for me, when I put on my salesperson hat, I want to make sure that contracting, like when I've had my sales consultation, boom, I can send out a contract with a click of a button and it's that easy. But I don't want to do something that tries to automate my consultation process to say, oh, we're just going to put a chatbot on our website so you can, talk to a chatbot about your automation needs. Like, no, that's the exact wrong way to think about it. You want to say, how can I actually increase my human touch points that matter on the revenue side, on the client relationship and delivery side by automating the stuff that doesn't matter from that perspective? And that's why it's these dirty, gritty, boring things that don't make a big splash on YouTube, because you're focused on the boring stuff that needs automating so that you can focus on the human touch point side.
I couldn't agree any more with that, Dan. And I think it's really interesting, even on that example of like the AI SDR, which is like you see so many people talking about it. It's a big buzz now. But like instead of automating that SDR outreach, let's automate how that person gets information so that SDR knows who to reach out to and enable them with the most relevant information to be human with that outreach. Is that hard?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way to go. Is you need to be up-leveling people so that they know how to have real conversations. And so if the automated SDR thing is the next generation of where this all goes, then you need to have SDRs that have more business experience who can actually talk and sift through all the data that you have, because you're just trying to look at it from a numbers game perspective. And now you need to actually focus on, okay, well, you've got the numbers to back it up, but now we need to be able to have better conversations.
And absolutely right. I think that really ties back to when you're saying to the real numbers, what actually matters. That's focused on the business side and in what's going on from a business before you're adding in that layer of technology. That's so important because, I could sit here and we could automate everything to where I don't have to do much in a day, but really, what is that actually going to do? What kind of impact are we going to have? I think you don't know. It could be a giant waste of time. Focus on doing those little micro tests and understanding what is going to be most important, or what of those signals that you were mentioning before are the highest converting if we do. And then let's spend some time on automating something before we hire somebody else. That's a really good use of being able to understand what is the business need that we have before we're laying on technology and then eventually maybe another person into that process as well.
Well, and if I could give you another example on the marketing side of the house, there's more and more and more around AI avatars that you can have and AI voice clones that you can have. But if I think about the processes, where does AI help me the most in automating my marketing tasks? I want to understand what are the top opportunities for content that we can create because of other successful creators. That's a great task for automating that. So I don't have to spend hours scouring content for that to be able to summarize it. Or I use AI to improve my voice quality in a recording. Plenty of video editing programs and audio editing programs that have AI features that I can use for that. But what's crazy to me is the number of companies that are like, yeah, we just want to automate the actual content creation. And I keep thinking, I'm like, what's the point? Like the number of people who are like, yeah, I'm going to have ChatGPT come up with like all of the content for my podcast. You lack any perspective. Like you don't have human perspective when you're just recycling and regurgitating the same information that's out there. And that I think always comes down to focus on what's important. Like have tech take care of the side that doesn't matter, that wastes your time, that's boring, that's tedious. But the part where you need perspective and you need human touch, that's where you need to be driving that as a business owner, as a CEO.
A perfect example. And even if you're a CEO or not, I think that there's so many different areas of understanding where is the human in that machine, right? ChatGPT, for an example, it's great for that idea creation of like, what kind of questions could I ask Dan based upon their goals of their business, right? Or even I've used it as well to like, can you help me write a post based upon a transcript of what this person's saying, so that at least it gives me it reduces that thought fatigue that I have of actually writing it. And then I could come in and say, no, I don't like this. Let's reformat this. Let's edit this. And then that's the human touch. I think that relationship of finding where could we utilize AI, or whether it's AI or not, whatever that tool is, where could we use that tool, and where does the human come into that as well? I know that there's a lot of companies as well that I'm so excited, and it's a big goal of mine too, of with this, podcasts like this and other ones that we do, of using Pipedream to help drive some of that creation after we did this recording, right? So we're using the human touch, and like there's no AI in us having this conversation, besides maybe some of the features that Zoom has. But the point being is that, it's how could I throw this long form video into a Google Drive, and then how could it cut up little snips to where at the end I could go ahead and I could edit those posts, and I have a month worth of posts from just this conversation.
Exactly. That's the use case that makes a ton of sense, right? How do I find the key moments of this conversation, apply the captions, chop it up, schedule it? Those use cases all make a ton of sense.
Right. And then that aligns to then it's taking that step back. Well, that aligns to the goals of my business, because we said earlier, as an agency, we're driving a lot of our inbound through content. So it's how do we have the great conversations with the people that are going to have the biggest impact on our business? Then how do we utilize technology to distribute that? Because distribution in the world of content is everything. Then it's how do we utilize these different areas? And that's one of the things that I know that a lot of customers are really excited about from like the marketing perspective for Pipedream. But I'm curious for you, outside of the marketing use case, what are you most excited next to build within Pipedream?
Yeah, honestly, we're using Pipedream as this layer. We talked about these business processes that we see some commonalities in. So we're taking something within Pipedream and we're creating essentially what we're calling this automation system, which is to say, how could we deploy the best CRM project management tool, automated contracting, automated invoicing, automated communications? How could we deploy that so that a project that would typically take hundreds of hours for a client can now be something that they can get immediate value from right away? And so we're really excited for being able to use Pipedream as really that kind of productization engine behind what we're doing.
That's so exciting, Dan. One of the final questions I have here: if you were an agency owner who is listening, who hasn't yet adopted Pipedream, what kind of advice would you say to them?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would do is start exploring with the AI tool to be able to build things out. And then I would really get into the code part of it right away. So yes, there are apps or tools that we can use within it, like conditional logic and checking for stuff. But I would try to get both feet wet and jumping in with the code features. So when you click and you're choosing for an integration that's available, I would almost forget the productized ones. And I would jump right into, hey, use this connection within Node so that you can start seeing how easy it is to be able to write that code. And for us, when we started doing that, there was almost no looking back. It's not to say, obviously, there's still a lot of value for people who don't know how to code and want to use kind of the more guardrail approach to it. But once we started saying, we're going to just jump into the code, that's what made it so much more efficient on our side.
And that's one of our biggest differentiators as well. So highly recommend, if you are jumping into Pipedream, go ahead, test it out. If you have any questions, obviously happy to help, or reach out to Dan, because Dan is an expert at these things as well. Dan, where can people learn more about you and Automation Helpers if they were interested in trying to get some of this automation help?
Yeah, certainly. There's our website, automationhelpers.com, or you can search for my name, Dan Leeman, on YouTube, where we've got quite the collection of other automation related content.
Dan, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining today's show on Not Just a Pipe Dream. Stay tuned for a new show coming soon. Thank you all so much.